Let me paint you a picture. It's a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or not. Gray, heavy, holding its breath. I'm standing in front of a bathroom mirror in a hotel room, wearing a maternity dress I bought 2 weeks earlier because nothing else fits anymore. My ankles are swollen. My back has been aching since 3 a.m., and I am 8 months pregnant. I look at myself, really look, and I think, how did you end up here? Not in a hotel room, not in that dress, but here, at the end of something that was supposed to be forever, standing alone, about to walk into a courthouse and sign papers that would end my marriage. And I want to tell you, before I get into any of this, that I was not a naive woman. I was not the kind of person who missed red flags. Break time 5. I was a woman who saw them, cataloged them, and chose to believe the explanations. That's different. And that distinction matters, because understanding why I stayed is the only way any of what happened next makes sense. So let me start from the beginning, or at least, close enough to it. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was 31, a civil engineer, tall, with the kind of easy confidence that reads as warmth until you know him well enough to understand it's actually control. He was funny. He was attentive in the beginning, the way some men are when they're still performing the version of themselves they want you to fall in love with. We dated for 2 years, married at 28. And for the first 3 years of our marriage, I will be honest with you, it was good, not perfect, but good. Break time 05s. We had a house in a quiet suburb outside of Atlanta. I worked as a project coordinator at a nonprofit. He traveled for work sometimes, but he always came home. And then, gradually, things shifted. The calls he took in the garage. The weekends away that extended a day longer than they should have. The way he started looking at his phone and immediately flipping it face down when I walked into a room. I noticed. I always noticed. But every time I brought it up, Daniel had a way of making my concern feel like an accusation. Of turning my question into evidence of my insecurity. You're always looking for something to be wrong, he'd say. Can't I have a private conversation without you interrogating me? So I stopped asking. I told myself I was being paranoid. I focused on work, I focused on us, and then I got pregnant. Break time 05s. I want to be very clear about something. This baby was wanted. By me. I had been wanting a child for 2 years by the time the test came back positive. Daniel had always been lukewarm on the idea. Not opposed, but not enthusiastic. So when I showed him the test, I watched his face carefully. He smiled. He hugged me. He said all the right things, but something in his eyes didn't reach his mouth, and I filed that away in the part of myself I had trained to be quiet. The pregnancy was hard. I had severe morning sickness in the first trimester, sciatica from around month 5, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that doesn't get described accurately in any book. Daniel was present, technically. He came to most of the appointments. He assembled the crib. Break time 05s. But there was a growing emotional distance between us that I couldn't name and couldn't close, no matter how many times I tried to reach across it. And then, at 6 months pregnant, I found out not from a text, not from lipstick on a collar. I know that's what people expect. I found out because his car insurance renewal came in the mail, and the secondary driver listed on the policy was a woman named Renee Castillo, a name I had never heard, listed at an address in Buckhead that was not our home. I sat down at our kitchen table and stared at that document for 20 minutes. Then I made a phone call to a private investigator. Her name was Renee Castillo, 34 years old. She worked in commercial real estate. She had her own condo, the same condo it turned out. Break time .05s, where Daniel had been spending his late nights at the office for the better part of 18 months. The investigator gave me a folder. I'm not going to describe every photo in it. I'll just tell you that Daniel's car was parked in her building's garage 4 to 5 nights a week. That they had dinner together at restaurants I had suggested to Daniel for our anniversary, and he had said he was too tired to try. That at least twice, he had spent the entire weekend with her while telling me he was at a work conference. 18 months, our entire pregnancy, conceived, discovered, and now almost fully gestated, had been lived alongside this other relationship, this other woman. This other life he was apparently constructing while I was growing his child alone in our house. I did not confront him that night. Or the night after. Break time 05s. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney first. I needed to understand what I was walking into before I blew up the room. My attorney, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life, sat across from me, reviewed what I had, and said very calmly, "We have more than enough, but timing matters. Let's be strategic." Patricia walked me through Georgia divorce law. She explained equitable distribution. She told me that because we had a child on the way, Custody and child support would be central. She helped me understand what I was entitled to, what I should document, and crucially, what I should not do before we filed. Don't move out, she said. Don't give him reason to change accounts. Don't confront him. Just keep living your life, gather what we need, break time 05s, and let me do the rest. So I did something that took every ounce of self-control I possess. I went home. I looked at my husband across our dinner table. I said, "How was your day?" And I kept the folder locked in my car. For 6 weeks, I gathered bank statements, joint account records, photos of marital assets. With Patricia's guidance, I documented everything methodically, quietly, legally. And at 32 weeks pregnant, we filed. Daniel's reaction when he was served was not guilt. It was not remorse. It was fury. He came home that afternoon. He had been served at his office, which Patricia had specifically arranged. And he walked through the front door with the papers in his hand and his face the color of something that's been left too long in the sun. "What is this?" he said. "You know what it is," I said. "You can't be serious." Break time 05s. "You're about to have a baby." "We are about to have a baby," I said, "which you might want to consider when you think about how you'd like the next month's bills to go." He wanted to fight. He wanted to argue. He wanted to make this about my paranoia and my behavior and the way I was destroying our family. But I had 6 weeks of silence stored up inside me, and it had calcified into something he couldn't move. I told him I was staying in the house until after the birth. The attorney had advised this. He could make other arrangements. He called Renee Castillo that night. I know because he did it in the garage, and the walls of that house were not as thick as he thought. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was what Renee Castillo was about to do next, because she wasn't just his girlfriend. Break time 05s. She was a woman with her own agenda, her own grievances, and she was about to walk into my divorce, proceeding with a move that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The weeks between the filing and the first court date were some of the longest of my life. My body was doing its own enormous work. The baby was moving constantly now, pressing against my ribs, reminding me in the most physical way possible that whatever happened with Daniel, there was someone on the other side of this who needed me to be steady. So I was steady. I went to my prenatal appointments alone. I packed the hospital bag alone. I set up the nursery, choosing a soft sage green that Daniel had never expressed an opinion about anyway. My mother flew in from Houston. My best friend Kezia, who had never liked Daniel, break time 0.05s, who had told me 3 years into the marriage that something was off about him, and who I had defended him to more times than I can count. She showed up with food, with presents, with the particular grace of a person who does not say, "I told you so," even when they absolutely could. I told Kezia everything one night at the kitchen table after my mother had gone to sleep. The folder, the investigator, Renee Castillo, all of it. Kezia listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is not something she normally does. And when I finished, she said, "Okay, tell me what you need. That's love. That's what it looks like when it's real." Daniel, meanwhile, had retained his own attorney, a man named Gerald Watts, who had a reputation for being aggressive in litigation. That told me something about Daniel's intentions. Break time 0.05s. He wasn't going to be gracious. He wasn't going to make this easy. What he didn't know was that Patricia had been doing this for 22 years, and she was better. The first court date was set for November 14th, a preliminary hearing. Not the final divorce decree, but the first formal proceeding, where temporary orders around custody, asset access, and living arrangements would be established. I woke up that morning at 5 a.m. I showered carefully. I put on the maternity dress. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. 8 months pregnant, tired, alone in a hotel room, because I had moved out of the house 3 weeks earlier, when my attorney said the preliminary orders would go more smoothly if I wasn't there. And I thought, you are going to walk into that room, and you are going to be okay. Break time 0.05s. I didn't know yet how true that would turn out to be, and for all the wrong reasons. Part 2. What Rennie did those shifts, more tense, more propulsive. The Fulton County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning has a particular energy. It's bureaucratic and exhausted and alive all at once. People filing past in suits and in street clothes, carrying folders, looking at phones, waiting. There's a specific smell to courthouses. Old carpet and recycled air and something like institutional coffee that nobody is really enjoying. Patricia met me in the lobby at 8:45. She looked at me the way a general looks at a map, assessing, calm, already 3 steps ahead. "You doing okay?" she asked. "I'm here," I said. "That's all we need." She walked me through what to expect. The preliminary hearing would likely be brief, an hour, maybe less. Break time 05s, Gerald Watts would present Daniel's position. That I had vacated the marital home voluntarily, that the filing was precipitous, that Daniel was a committed father-to-be who deserved equal consideration in all decisions. Patricia would counter with the evidence, the 18-month affair, the financial documentation, the pattern of deception. Temporary orders would be requested. Child support structure, asset freeze on joint accounts, clarity on the family home. It should have been straightforward. It was not straightforward. We walked into the courtroom at 9:02. Daniel was already there, seated beside Gerald Watts at the respondent's table. Dark suit, no tie. The studied look of a man trying to appear wronged. He glanced at me when I entered. His eyes went to my stomach first. Something crossed his face that I couldn't fully read. Break time = 5's not guilt, maybe calculations. I sat down beside Patricia. I placed my hands flat on the table. I focused on my breathing. The judge, the Honorable Marcus T. Webb, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and the energy of someone who has seen every version of this story before, entered at 9:08 and called the session to order. We were 10 minutes into the proceeding when the back door of the courtroom opened, and Renee Castillo walked in. I didn't know it was her at first. I heard the door, felt the shift in the room's attention, that particular subtle change in atmosphere when something unexpected has entered a space, and I turned to look the way everyone did. She was tall, professionally dressed, in a charcoal blazer and slacks, her dark hair pulled back neatly. Break time 05's. She carried a leather portfolio and had the expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was committed to it. She was, I noticed with a detachment I was proud of, objectively striking. She walked to the front of the courtroom and spoke before anyone could stop her. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. My name is Renee Castillo. I have information material to this proceeding, and I am requesting permission to be heard. The judge looked over his glasses. Gerald Watts had gone very still, and across the table. This is the part I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count. Daniel's face did something I had never seen it do before in 7 years. It went white, not pale, white. The color draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug. His jaw tightened. Break time 05's. His eyes found Renee and then immediately looked away and then back again, the way a person does when they are trying to control a reaction they cannot control. Patricia leaned toward me and murmured, "Did you know she was coming?" "No," I said, and I genuinely didn't. Whatever Renee Castillo was about to do, she had not done it for me. Judge Webb granted her limited time to speak. Gerald Watts objected. The judge overruled him, noting that the witness had voluntarily presented and that her testimony, if material, was within his discretion to hear. Renee Castillo sat in the witness chair with the portfolio on her lap. She looked at the judge. She did not look at Daniel. She said, "I have been in a relationship with Daniel Holt for approximately 22 months. I was aware that he was married." Break time 05's. I am not here to excuse my own behavior in that regard. The room was very quiet. "I am here," she continued, "because 6 weeks ago when Daniel was served with these divorce papers, he contacted me and made a series of requests that I have since come to understand were not in my interest, or in the interest of justice in this proceeding." Patricia's pen was moving. He asked me to sign a document stating that our relationship began after the date his wife filed for divorce. He provided a date, September 28th, and told me that if I signed a statement placing the start of our relationship after that date, it would reduce his financial exposure in the divorce settlement. He told me that we had been just friends until September. She opened the portfolio. I did not sign it. Break time 05's. But I kept it. She produced a document and passed it to the bailiff. I also kept his texts asking me to sign it. She produced a second set of papers. And a third item, a series of financial transfers from a joint account that Daniel Holt shares with his wife, made to my personal account over the course of 14 months, totaling approximately $43,000, which Daniel described to me as operational funds for a joint investment. I have since consulted my own attorney, who advised me these transfers may constitute dissipation of marital assets. She closed the portfolio. I am not here to protect Daniel Holt. I am here because he asked me to lie in a legal proceeding, and I am not willing to do that. I want to describe for you what it felt like to sit in that room while Renee Castillo spoke. Break time 05's. It was not triumphant, the way revenge stories are sometimes told. It was not a movie moment with a swelling score. It was something quieter and stranger and more complicated than that. Part of me, a large part, was watching Daniel, watching the man I had built a life with sit in a courtroom chair and visibly unravel. Gerald Watts was whispering furiously in his ear. Daniel's hands were flat on the table, mirroring mine, I noticed. in the way that couples who have been together for years sometimes unconsciously mirror each other without knowing. And his jaw was working like he was trying to chew through something. Part of me felt something I can only describe as grief. Not for Daniel, not for the marriage. I had grieved that already, in private, over 6 weeks of silence in our house while I packed documents into a folder in my car. Break time 05s. I grieved, I think, for the woman I had been at 28, standing at an altar, genuinely believing that what was in front of her was real. And part of me, I will be honest with you, because you came here for the truth, felt a cold, clean, powerful wave of something that was almost like relief. Because here was the thing about Renee Castillo. She had not come to help me. She had come because Daniel had asked her to participate in his deception and she had refused. She had come because she had her own anger, her own wounds, her own reckoning. In this single act, walking into a courtroom with a leather portfolio and 22 months of evidence, she had made a choice to stop covering for him. And that choice, made entirely for her own reasons, happened to set me free. Break time .05s. The preliminary hearing lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes instead of 1. Gerald Watts requested a recess, which Judge Webb granted for 15 minutes. During the recess, I watched Gerald walk Daniel out of the courtroom with the body language of a man containing an explosion. Renee Castillo sat quietly in the gallery. She did not look at me. I looked at her, though. I looked at her for a long time. Patricia used the recess to call her paralegal and get a research pull on marital asset dissipation case law in Georgia. She was already building the next argument before the judge had even come back. When we reconvened, the hearing shifted entirely. The $43,000 in transfers became the centerpiece. Patricia moved to have the joint accounts frozen pending full financial disclosure. Gerald objected. Break time .05s. The judge granted a partial freeze. Patricia requested an expedited discovery order for Daniel's personal accounts. The judge granted it. By the time we walked out of that courthouse at 11:47 a.m., the proceedings had gone from a routine preliminary hearing to the opening move in what Patricia called a significantly strengthened position. That woman just handed us the dissipation claim. Patricia said in the parking lot, not unkindly, but with the precision of someone cataloging ammunition. $43,000 from a joint account to a girlfriend over 14 months. That's real money in equitable distribution. The text messages asking her to falsify a statement are obstruction territory. This changes things considerably. I leaned against her car because my back was screaming and I needed to take the weight off my feet. Break time .05s. I looked up at the gray Atlanta sky, still doing that thing where it couldn't decide whether to rain. What happens to her? I asked. Renee. Patricia considered this. Nothing criminal, if that's what you're asking. She came forward voluntarily. She wasn't party to the fraud. She was the one who refused to participate in it. Her attorney probably advised her that coming forward preemptively was the smartest move, both legally and personally. It was brave, I said. Whatever her reasons. Patricia looked at me with something that might have been respect. Yes, she said, it was. I drove back to the hotel. I called my mother. I called Kezia. I ate a bowl of soup from the hotel restaurant and put my feet up and felt my daughter move inside me. She had been active all morning. Break time .05s, kicking and rolling as if she too had been paying attention, and I talked to her the way I had started to do in recent weeks. I told her, today was a big day. We're going to be okay. She kicked twice, which I chose to interpret as agreement. And then my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I was too tired to screen calls. Is this Miriam Holt? Yes. A pause. This is Renee Castillo. Part 3. What comes after Thone? Reflective, resolved, deeply human. I have thought a lot about what it means when the woman who hurt you turns out to also be the woman who helps you. There is no clean moral in that. There is no simple story. Renee Castillo was not a villain redeemed, and she was not a hero. She was a person who had made choices she regretted, choices that had costs, and who in the end, break time 05s. Chose something true over something convenient. That phone call lasted 47 minutes. She did most of the talking. I did most of the listening. And I want to share with you the parts of that conversation that I think matter, not because it's anyone else's business, but because this story isn't really a story about a cheating husband. It's a story about what women do to each other and for each other when the same person has used both of them. Renee told me she had found out I was pregnant the same way I had found out about her, accidentally. She had seen a prenatal vitamin prescription in Daniel's car, asked him about it, and he had told her it was from a neighbor he was doing a favor for. She said she had believed him for about 48 hours. Breakpoint 05s. And then the doubt had taken root the way doubt does. when something doesn't sit right in your body. She had done some looking of her own. She had found my social media. She had seen photos of me, visibly pregnant at a family gathering, posted by one of my cousins. She had confronted Daniel. And this is the part I want you to hear. Daniel had told her the pregnancy was an accident, that we were essentially separated, that I had been the one pushing him away for years, that I had refused to be a real partner, and that he had found in Renee what was missing at home. He had told her this so completely, with such practiced sincerity, that she had believed it, she said, until the divorce papers were served and he showed up at her condo asking her to sign a statement that she knew was false. That was the moment, she said. Break time .05s, not the prenatal vitamins, not the photos. The moment Daniel asked her to lie for him, to lie in a legal document in a divorce proceeding that involved a pregnant woman. That was the moment the story he had told her about himself stopped holding together. I realized, she said, that everything he told me about you, he had probably told you about whatever came before me, and whatever comes after me, he'll say the same things. I said, yes, probably. There was a long silence. I'm sorry, she said. I know it doesn't fix anything. No, I agreed. It doesn't fix anything. But I wanted to say it. I held the phone. My daughter was quiet now, settled, the way she got in the evenings when I lay still. Outside the hotel window, Atlanta's skyline was doing what Atlanta does at dusk. That particular amber haze. Break time 05s. The tower's going gold before the gray comes in. Thank you for what you did today, I said. And I meant it, fully, without complication. Because whatever Renee's reasons were, whatever her own grief in this looked like, she had walked into a room with the truth and put it on the table. And that is not a small thing. We did not become friends. I want to be clear about that. This is not that story. We ended the call politely, and we have not spoken since. But I think about her sometimes. I think about two women orbiting the same gravitational pull, never meant to meet, finally meeting in a courthouse of all places. I think about the fact that Daniel had counted on us seeing each other as enemies. Had counted on the particular way women are sometimes made to feel like competitors in the exact situations where they are, in fact, break time, go fives. The only people who genuinely understand each other. He miscalculated that. Badly. The divorce was finalized 4 months later, 2 months after my daughter was born. Her name is Zora. She came into the world on a Wednesday morning in December, in a hospital room filled with my mother and Kezia, and a midwife named Sandra who had the most reassuring voice I have ever heard in my life. She was 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She had my nose and a full head of dark hair, and the most serious expression on her face, like she had arrived with opinions and was deciding when to share them. Daniel was in the waiting room. He had asked to be there. Patricia had advised me I didn't have to allow it, but I had. Whatever he had done, Zora was going to have a father. Break time, grow fives. And I had made a decision very early in the pregnancy that I would not be the reason that relationship failed. He could do that on his own if he chose to. I would not engineer it. He came in after she was born. He held her for a few minutes, he cried, which surprised me. Real tears, the kind that aren't performed. I looked at him crying over this baby, and I felt, one last time, the ghost of who I had thought he was. The man I had stood at an altar beside, who had reached for my hand during the ceremony and held it tight. That man had never fully existed. But the grief for him was real anyway. Now let me tell you about the settlement. Because this is the part of the story that matters in terms of what actually happened, what the consequences were, break time .05s, and why Renee Castillo's testimony in that preliminary hearing changed the course of everything. The $43,000 in marital asset transfers was central. Patricia argued, successfully, that this constituted dissipation, the use of marital funds for a purpose entirely outside the marriage, specifically to fund a long-term extramarital relationship. In Georgia, dissipation of marital assets is a recognized factor in equitable distribution. The judge did not simply give me back the $43,000. He factored it, along with the full picture of the marital estate, into a distribution that landed considerably in my favor. The family home, we had purchased it in 2019, and in the Atlanta market, it had appreciated significantly, was ordered to be sold. After the mortgage payoff, break time '05s, my share of the equity was just over $114,000. That was mine. Clean child support was calculated based on Daniel's income and the custody arrangement. We agreed to joint legal custody, with Zora primarily residing with me. The monthly figure was fair, not punitive. But fair. Daniel did not pursue the obstruction angle from the falsified statement request. His attorney strongly advised against it, and Daniel for once listened. The text messages sat in the court record. A permanent part of what this was. Gerald Watts, I learned later through Patricia's network, had privately told Daniel that he had significantly underestimated the situation. I found a certain amount of satisfaction in that. I want to talk about who I was in the months after all of this. Break time .05s. I want to talk about it because I think this is the part of revenge stories that never gets told. What it actually feels like when the dust settles and you're still there, still yourself, still having to build a life out of the material that's left. The satisfaction of the settlement lasted about a week. And then I was just a new mother, alone at 3 a.m., with a baby who needed to eat every 2 hours, in a rented house in Decatur that I had found after the family home sold, sitting in a rocking chair in the dark, wondering who I was going to be now. I had left my job at the nonprofit when the pregnancy got complicated. I needed to return to work, but I needed childcare first. My mother stayed for 6 weeks and then had to go back to Houston. Kezia came every weekend she could, but she had her own life, her own job. Break 05s. There were many nights where it was just Zora and me and the particular silence of a house where only 2 people live, one of whom cannot yet speak. I will not romanticize that period. It was hard. Some nights it was very hard. But here is what I will tell you. Hard is not the same as wrong. Hard is not the same as a mistake. I had made the right decision. I had walked away from a man who had spent the better part of 2 years constructing a double life around me, who had used my quietness and my trust as cover, who had asked another woman to lie in a courtroom rather than face what he had done. I had walked away with my daughter and my integrity and, eventually, after Patricia finished, enough financial stability to build something real. I went back to work when Zora was 4 months old, part-time initially, then full. Break time .05s. I found a daycare that was warm and well-staffed and only 15 minutes from the new house. I learned how to manage a budget on one income plus child support, which is a specific and unglamorous skill that nobody tells you you'll need. I learned how to assemble furniture, which I had always left to Daniel. And I want to tell you that the first time I built a bookshelf by myself and stepped back and looked at it standing upright, I felt something I can only describe as disproportionate pride, and I don't think it was disproportionate at all. Daniel remarried 18 months later. Not Renee, they had ended before Zora was born. Someone else, a woman I've never met. I know this because Zora, at 2 years old, break time .05s, called her Daddy's Nicole with the placid factual simplicity of a toddler who has not yet learned that this information might land differently with different people. Daddy's Nicole, I repeated. She has a cat, Zora said, which was apparently the more interesting detail. I laughed, full, real, genuinely surprised laughter. And I noticed that the laughter didn't have anything sharp in it, no bitterness, no residue. Just funny, just a toddler telling me about a cat. That was the moment I knew I was actually okay. I've been asked, by my mother, by Kezia, by one therapist I saw for 8 months during the first year, and whose name I won't share because she deserves her privacy. Whether I hate Daniel, the honest answer is, not anymore. I did, for a while. Break .05s. I hated him specifically and precisely in the way that you hate someone who made you doubt your own perception of reality. Gaslighting leaves a particular residue. It makes you distrust your own judgment, your own memory, your own instincts. Recovering from that, rebuilding trust in your own mind, takes longer than recovering from the betrayal itself. But hate is exhausting, and I have a child to raise, and Zora is going to need both of us to be functional humans for the next 18 years at minimum. So I have done the work of moving hate into something more neutral. Something like, he is the father of my daughter and a person who is capable of serious harm and also of real love, probably, in the limited way he is able to give it. That's the full picture. I hold all of it. What I will not do is pretend the harm didn't happen. Break time .05s. What I will not do is smooth it over for the sake of narrative tidiness. He did what he did. It cost what it cost. And the consequences, financial, legal, personal, were appropriate. That's not revenge, that's accountability. And there is a difference. Renee Castillo left Atlanta about a year after the divorce. I saw it on LinkedIn of all places, a new position, a new city. Philadelphia, I think. I looked at her profile for a few minutes. Her headshot, her professional history. This woman who had been for so long, a name on an insurance document, a figure in a photograph in an investigator's folder, and then finally a voice on the phone for 47 minutes. I wished her well, internally, genuinely. And then I closed the browser tab. Here is what I want to leave you with. Break time .05s. I walked into that courthouse 8 months pregnant, and I was terrified. Not of Daniel, not of Gerald Watts, not of what the hearing would bring. I was terrified of what it meant to be starting over, truly over, not just legally over, with a baby coming and a marriage ending and no clear picture of what the next chapter looked like. What I learned, sitting in that gray Atlanta courtroom while Renee Castillo opened a leather portfolio and told the truth, is that you cannot plan for all the ways things might work out in your favor. You can only prepare. You can only document carefully and retain the right attorney and trust your instincts and refuse to be made smaller by someone else's choices. And sometimes, not always, not neatly, not without cost, the truth finds its own way into the room. Zora is 3 now. She has strong opinions about her shoes and which cup her water goes in and the correct way to hold a crayon. She is fierce and funny and she laughs with her whole body. She has never, not once, looked at me like I am someone who lost something. Because I didn't. I want you to remember that. Whatever version of this story you're living, whatever courthouse you're walking toward, whatever folder you're compiling in secret, whatever mirror you're standing in front of at 5 a.m., in a hotel room, you are not the woman who lost. You are the woman who is still standing. That's not nothing. That's everything. If this story resonated with you, if any part of it felt familiar, drop a comment below. You don't have to share details. Even just, I needed to hear this today is enough. I read every single one. If you're in a situation where you need resources, whether that's finding a family law attorney, understanding your rights during a pregnancy in a divorce proceeding, or just understanding what your options look like, I've linked some resources in the description. And if this is your first time on this channel, welcome. Hit subscribe. We tell real stories here. And we always tell them fully. I'll see you in the next one.